So I'm here with Carlos Matias, author of Emergency Quarters, his first picture book. And my name is Andrina Rodriguez, and I'm a book reviewer for the Dominican Writers Association. I'm so honored to talk with Carlos about his upcoming children's book. So to start us off, Emergency Quarters is about a young boy, Ernesto, who's been given quarters by his mom that he can only use for emergencies, and he tries his best to avoid spending it on tempting treats. So, Carlos, can you tell us about what inspired this book?
Yeah. So the book is really inspired by like my childhood and growing up in Queens. Excuse me. Yeah, it's a true story. Like my parents, when I started like walking to school by myself or like with my friends or like hanging out after school, like, cell phones didn't exist back then. So then yeah, they would give me a quarter like every day before I left my house. And she would tell me like I say in the book, and she'd be like, "Oh, if in case of emergency, if you need anything, like, here you go." And I would only have that quarter, and kind of like Ernesto in the book, I would see my friends just like, they had like dollar bills and
Yeah.
allowance and stuff, and they'd be like spending it, and I would just be like, "No, no, I'm good, I'm good," because I only had like that one quarter. So yeah, it's definitely inspired by my childhood, and it was one of those things where like you think it's unique to you, but then once I announced like the book, a lot of people hit me up and they're like, "Oh, I remember that. Like my parents used to give me quarters or had a bunch of quarters in my backpack when I used to like go out." So I was like, "Oh wow, it's pretty cool that so many people related to it. Yeah, I just thought it was a cool story to share because it's something that I hadn't seen like really covered in stories or in like picture books. So I
Mm.
thought, yeah, pretty unique
Yeah,
story.
yeah, that's so cool. And I know, it started off first as a column on the New York Times. Can you tell me about what it was like? I know Mabel, the editor of the book, she reached out to turn what was originally an article into the book. Did you ever think that of turning into a book up until that point or before that point?
No way, no. It was such a surprise. So yeah, like you mentioned, there's a column in the New York Times called Metropolitan Diaries. And yeah, it's basically just a column where they kind of like focus on like New York stories. So like, a bunch of people submit. I read there's like hundreds of submissions, I think like a week or something. So it's kind of pretty hard to get into. So yeah, actually when I started writing it, it was more to keep myself accountable to like write
Mm,
short stories. So I was like, it was actually my New Year's resolution that year. That was like 2 years ago. And I was
mm,
like, I'll try to write a short story every week, but I know I'm not gonna do it. So I was like, oh, maybe a cool thing to do is every week I have to submit it to the Metropolitan Diaries to keep myself like, and my thinking was like, oh well, so I'm gonna write a short story every week for the rest of my life because I'm never gonna get it in
yeah.
the column. That was I was like, once I get in the column, I'll stop. I was like, this is probably gonna take years, who knows? And it was actually the first one. So I wrote it, sent it, and then like I want to say like in a week or two,
Mm,
they emailed me back and they were like, oh yeah, we'd love to publish it. So even that in itself was just a such a crazy experience to be,
yeah.
in the New York Times. That was like one of my dreams. And then yeah, Mabel saw it. She actually reached out to Ed Shanahan, which is the editor of the column. And then Mabel Sue, like you mentioned, my editor, she's the one that reached out. And then Ed emailed me and was like, the email just said like FYI, good luck. So I was like,
Mm,
and he forwarded me her email. So I'm reading it and it was like, oh, I like your story. So I was like, oh, this is cool. He forwarded like a nice review.
yeah.
And then it went on to say, we'd love to turn it into a picture book. And I was like, what? Then I read her signature and it said like from HarperCollins. So I just started like imagine like freaking out. I was like, this is so
Yeah.
like not what I expected.
Yeah.
It's like the good news that it was in the Times and the amazing news that there's a possibility it might turn into a picture book. Yes, I was, she asked me if I wanted to. I was like, of course, super down to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing that you even you work towards that resolution of putting the effort into work to getting this, this
Mm.
feature and then even to hopefully get a short story. And like that's amazing that it even worked out to the point where you something that you didn't even expect. So it's crazy how things work that way. That's amazing.
Yeah,
So
thanks.
yeah, so something I want to say that for me what really resonated and what really meant a lot in this story is being from Queens myself. I saw a lot of parts in it that I really recognize. I'm like, wait,
Yeah.
that's my seven train. I take that. That's the Lemon Ice King, like all those places. So it was really exciting to see that. And I think what's also really cool was that this book does go a little bit way back when payphones were pretty much still a thing. Um,
Mhm.
and while reading it, I felt so much nostalgia, not because of that, but more so because it captured the area that I grew up in. I'm
Yeah.
curious if you felt the same way, even probably, I don't know if did it hit more when you were writing the book or even the article? Like how did it kind of how did it feel for you in both
Yeah.
times?
Um, I guess writing the article, I didn't feel it as much only because like the article, I believe like the limit was like 100 words,
Yeah.
100 words. So super short. Like I wanted, like when I wrote the article and sent it, I wanted to like show, by using like words and descriptive language, like talk about like the smell and the food and the noise and the honking of the car and the train pulling, so there was like a bunch of stuff I wanted to include in there, but I couldn't because of like the word count, right? So I feel like that didn't really come across in the column in the Metropolitan Diary piece. So then when they told me I could do it, that I was going to be a picture book, then I was like, oh, this is going to be amazing because I already knew what I wanted it to look like, and I wanted it to be like, you can kind of show um we have all these areas in every city, but I didn't want it to be like generic, like, oh yeah, these are some city streets,
Yeah.
I wanted it to be like someone sees it and is like, oh, this is like Queens, and like I know what street this is, and I wanted it to be very specific. And Gracie Zhang, the illustrator, did an amazing
Yeah.
job of that. We worked very close. Me being from the area and her knowing I'm from there, and even the editor, they really respected like my opinions, on everything from like what the characters look like to like the inside of the barber shop, Um, so I gave Gracie a bunch of like references,
Mm.
like you mentioned the Lemon Ice King, which is
Yeah.
actually like the block I grew up on. I
Oh,
grew up like
nice.
around the corner from there, like up until like my teenage years. The Seven Train, the Gucci Frito spot, like on
Yeah.
103rd,
Yeah.
So I sent her references like of all those things. And she like got it perfectly. And actually like I sent her the Seven Train, the 103rd stop, which is the
Mm.
stop where, I spend a lot of my time. And she had already sketched it out.
Oh,
So
nice.
sent it. She was like, that's so crazy. Like I saw pictures of the stop and this is the one I chose to like illustrate. So she was already illustrating like the 103rd Street stop of the 7 train. So yeah. Yeah, so yeah, to answer your question, like when we got to the picture book, that's when like it really hit me and I was like, oh wow, like I'm really gonna be able to like show, um Corona Queens and how it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, that's awesome because I mean I think about even when I was younger and the amount of picture books that I've read and it's like, all of them hit differently, but to see this even as an adult, like it hits so much and I can't wait
Wow.
to like, share it with like other kids that I know and all that. So I'm really excited about that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I mean that means a lot. I know you read your fair share of picture books, so
Yeah,
it means
yeah.
a lot saying that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
What part of Queens are you from?
So I'm actually from the 103rd area too.
Oh,
So
really?
yeah.
Oh,
So
look
that's
at
yeah.
that.
I mean, more like East Elmhurst, but like everything, like as far as like where I went to get my hair done, like the
Yeah,
cleaners, like that's where
yeah,
my grandfather's his house was, and like all a lot of a bunch of my cousins are like in that area. So yeah.
same. That's so cool.
Yeah. Um, so I want to, I mean, I think you kind of answered this question, but maybe I could just kind of skip to something else. But, considering this book is supposed to be set a few years ago, did you have any trouble kind of capturing the neighborhood the way that it was back then? Because I know that there's been so many changes. Did you have to dig a little bit, or was it kind of left to your imagination a little bit or anything?
Yeah, it was more to my imagination. Like ideally I would have loved to be like my plan was like, oh, I'm writing on this picture book and it takes place in Queens.
Yeah.
Let me go back and like go to a coffee shop or like a mom and pop restaurant and write my book from there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like a writer thing. But it was like during the pandemic, so like I
Mm.
didn't really want to fly, so I couldn't do that. So it was mostly just off memory and finding like old reference photos, like so like how Google Maps lets you
Oh yeah.
like the throughout the decades.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
I just did that, and like those are like the pictures I send
Mm.
Gracie. So yeah, technology helped a ton there.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it was mostly off yeah, just imagination and remembering. And it's funny because after I wrote it, I went back to like my old neighborhood, and it was actually crazy and kind of sad how like it hadn't changed a
Mm.
lot. Some of the businesses might have been replaced
Yeah.
with similar businesses, but like the street, it looked just like how it looked when I lived there, like, growing
Yeah.
up.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I can imagine. Like, I can't even, I mean, definitely, obviously, payphones aren't there anymore.
Yeah.
Um, but I know that, like, there's definitely been some changes. I mean, I don't think I can pinpoint exactly like what has changed. I would have to definitely look back to probably the way
Yeah.
you did, but I can see what you're saying. Like even if I was to compare like, oh, how did this look back then? It probably has even like I think McDonald's, like I think it just got like a remodel or something, but it
Yeah.
wasn't
Yeah.
necessarily like it hasn't been changed. La Cabaña's still there. Like I love
Exactly.
yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it's a lot of like remodeling some businesses that have been shut down, but yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely yeah.
That's probably, and I think one new thing is the that plaza by the train. I
Oh
think
yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, I forgot what was there. I think it was just a street, and it used to be like a movie theater. But then,
Oh yeah, that's what I was told. I think it was where uh is it the part where Walgreens is?
yeah, right, yeah, that the
Yeah,
Walgreens.
okay. Yeah, yeah, I think that's what yeah, I don't think oh yeah, actually I remember my mom telling me she's like, "Oh yeah, I think she took my brother to see Lion King." Like in all those movies. I think they saw Selena in that movie theater or
Yeah,
something.
yeah. Wow.
Um so yeah, so I mean, I didn't get to experience it. I probably was too young before
Yeah.
they changed it, but yeah, I've heard a lot of stories about how it was.
Yeah, it was very interesting growing up around there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know, like, are there any children's books that inspired you as you were writing Emergency Quarters? I know that there's been a lot more that kind of represent, our culture, but I'm not sure if there's many that represent Queens in particular or anything like that. So yeah, so I don't know if there's any that kind of came to mind or that you looked at while you were writing this.
Yeah, so not I didn't really see any that um were like about
Yeah.
Queens, or yeah, maybe even not even New York City. I think like but I did read a few that inspired me. The Last Stop on Market Street. I don't know if
Mm,
you heard that by Matt de la Peña.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, My Papi Has a Motorcycle by Isabel Quintero. Those two I loved. Like I don't know how many times I read that as I was writing this, just because I love the way I guess both of them were traveling through the city, but like different mode of transportation. Like Last Stop on Market Street, I think was like a bus, right? My Papi Has a Motorcycle. It's like the little girl sitting in the back of her dad's motorcycle. So I just love the way they showed like them like moving throughout the city,
Yeah.
showing the city, um, and like their neighborhood, interacting with all the different like personalities and character that they come across. So I really loved how those two books showed that,
Yeah.
even though it wasn't relating to like Queens or New York, they were like in different, I forgot where they're based.
Mm.
But yeah, those two really inspired me. I love Nigel and the Moon by Antoine Eady,
Mm.
just from like a storytelling and like his writing. I love, huge fan of his. So I'd say those three books are really what helped me. Because like again, like I wasn't writing to become a picture book writer, you know. So I wasn't here like reading a ton of picture books and trying to get, so like when it happened, I had to like go all the way back and like
Mm.
read like all the new stuff and all the old stuff
Yeah.
so I could see like what I'm doing and like, story structure and all that. Um, so yeah, I've read so many books. Like I remember I'd go to the library to take them out and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, we think your kid would love this one." And I'm like, "I
Yeah.
don't have any kids. These are all for me." But yeah, and it was yeah, I guess those three were the ones that mostly inspired me the most.
That's awesome. And even like as you were talking about children's books from like back then and now, I feel like this book itself, the illustration and just the story itself is so timeless. You would think that you would have picked it up like years ago, that it was published like back then or something. So that's another thing that I feel like gave that element of nostalgia that made you feel like, oh, you're reading like an old book that we just got from the library or that we bought at the bookstore one day. So
Yeah, that's so funny you mentioned that because I never thought about that. And hearing you say that, I'm like going back, I'm like, oh wow, yeah. Like if you look through it, like it could be like, oh, this book is like 10 years old, and
yeah,
you believe it because it does kind of like look like that. Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, I wish if we like it would we had more authors back then to see that kind of progress. It's unfortunate that it had to take this long, but I'm still grateful that we have someone like you to put this out
Oh,
into the world.
mm, thank you. I really appreciate it. No, I'm grateful we have, the work you guys are doing over there at Dominican Writers Association, which
Thank you.
is amazing. You guys have been amazing as far as like the reception I'm getting from the book and like, Angie's been
Yeah,
great helping stuff. She's amazing. But
yeah,
yeah, like you said, it's kind of whack that it took this long to, there are other writers also like writing these type of books. And like you mentioned, I didn't have these type of books growing up, you know? But I'm glad we're able to like at least do it now, like for the kids that are reading and coming up now.
for
So
sure, for sure.
it's an honor, really. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really happy. I'm really excited to see how kids digest it, how they get to immerse themselves into this book. So I'm really excited for you and for all of the generations to come.
Yeah, that's one thing I'm curious about. Like, once it's out there, like seeing kids be like, oh, like, I know that place.
Yeah.
I pass by there. You know what I mean? Like I've never been able to read a book or see a book and say that, So that I'm really excited about.
Yeah, it's kind of like with a movie when you watch it, you're like, wait a minute, like this movie is set, like I know this place. To see it in a book,
Yeah.
I mean, more kids are gonna see it too, so that's gonna be really exciting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
So, on that note, what do you hope that young readers take away from this story?
Huh. I mean, like I hope, like I guess like how you said on that note, like I do hope they leave with like a sense of like representation and then they can connect to the book. I hope that like not only the kids but also like the parents, and the people our age who are the ones buying the books and sharing the books. I hope they're like excited to like share a piece of their childhood, with the kids and maybe that that can like create some sort of connection. Um yeah, and I was gonna say something else. I forgot now. Yeah, oh yeah, so I guess also like I want them to take whatever they can or want from it because I feel like and I know everyone says that about, books, like, but like I feel this one, like there's so many things in it, and everyone I talk to says something different, like for me again, it was just like a personal story that, for my childhood. But like when Mabel first heard of it, she was like, "Oh, I love how it's about like independence and about how like even though the kid has a quarter and he wants his independence, he still needs like that connection to his mother."
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, sure. Yeah. I meant to do that. And a lot of people are like, "Oh yeah, I love how it's about like uh these like uh the characters like growing up with limited resources,
Mm.
doesn't have as much as his friend, and I'm like, yeah, that too. I feel like everyone I talk to has something different to say about the book,
Yeah.
things that I honestly didn't even think about, so it's like almost giving me too much credit to be like, "Oh yeah, I love how you did this." I'm like, I didn't even know what I was doing. I was just writing from from memory. Yeah, so I really hope like if they can take anything out of it that helps them like see themselves in it, like that's all I ask for really.
I love that. Yeah, I know that there's going to be so many things that people are going to take away. I was even trying to dissect it in multiple ways, but I honestly just couldn't, like, I couldn't look past just the representation of queens that I was like really taking that in. But yeah, and kind of like my last question that I wanted to ask, and do you have kind of any projects kind of coming up after this, or what do you hope for, like kind of coming out of emergency quarters, like even
Um,
right now or once it's published, whenever that is.
yeah, yeah. So let me see. So I'm working on my second picture book I'm almost done with.
Nice.
And then probably send it around and see, that one I'm also excited about because kind of like this one, it's very, and I don't want to give too much
Yeah, yeah,
away
yeah.
from it, but I'll probably tell you once you start recording.
Okay. Okay.
It, it has to do with an aspect of like Latino culture that the people I have shown, they're like, "Oh, this hasn't been covered like in a picture book or like a book really." So I'm really excited about that. So probably shopping that around soon. And then had some ideas for for like cookbook that has to do with queens. I won't go
Mhm.
much into it either, but super excited about that one too. So yeah, those are the two things I'm really working on right now.
Mm.
Hopefully, they'll be out in the world soon, but
Yeah. Oh, that's so exciting. I'm excited still that you're still working on something that does highlight Queens, because I think even as when I was younger, like everyone that within my family, we would always say like, there's a lot of stories out there that highlight Dominicans in this place, but like there's so many limited ones that highlight in Queens in particular, and I was like, but there's so many of us out here. Like, I don't
yeah,
understand. So I'm really happy to see you kind of like get the ball rolling in that, because I know there's a lot of us, and I've been meeting more and more like and powerhouses at that too, so I'm really
yeah.
excited to kind of see the representation grow.
Yeah, no, thanks. That means a lot. I know, like even here in Orlando, I've met a few
Yeah.
people from Queens, especially specifically Corona Queens, which is so odd.
Yeah.
I'm down here, and yeah, I mean, I never forget that I'm from Queens. Even like when like the last 5, 6 years in New York, I was in the Bronx, right?
Mhm.
And I'd be like at a restaurant or bar and they're like Mets versus Yankees, and I'm the only one like the Metro. I'm like, yeah, and everyone looks around. I'm like, oh man, forgot who I was, So I'm always like trying to represent Queens.
Oh,
And
awesome.
it's funny you say that because I agree. Like there's it's like they say it's like the world's borough, right? It has the
Yeah, yeah,
most languages spoken, the most people from different places, like the food from everywhere, like all these pockets, and it's like I guess it doesn't get the credit it
yeah,
deserved, both the stories coming out of there, the food coming out of
yeah.
there, everything. So I was like, yeah, let me at least try to do my part and like try to, get it out.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned like the Mets and Queens. I mean, the Mets and the Yankees, and that's something that even with my family, there's a lot of rivalry. Like my father, he's a diehard Mets fan, but like my grandfather was a Yankees fan. So like there's so much rivalry between our cousins that I'm like, I can't like my mom used to be a Yankees fan, but then she converted when she married my father that I'm like, oh well, like I guess that's
That
how.
was probably like, if this is gonna work,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He's always yeah, he's a diehard. Like he doesn't even care how many times they lose. Like he's still gonna like he's still gonna rep for them. So yeah.
that's what today I was like, I gotta throw on the Mets hat
Yeah.
for
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Carlos. This has been such a great interview, and I'm really excited to see Emergency Quarters out in the world for everybody else, which comes out in May 28th to be
that.
exact.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, so thank you again. This was such a great conversation.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for everything. And thank you guys for everything you've done, like I mentioned, and for helping me out and just helping Dominican writers everywhere.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank
Okay,
you.
I'm gonna stop recording here.